Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, the Dow sees its longest losing streak since 1974. That's after the Federal Reserve projected just 2 rate cuts in 2025, down from its original forecast of 4. It also cut interest rates for the third and final time this year by a 1/4 percentage point. What to expect next year? Fighting their way to get confirmed. President-elect Trump's cabinet picks seeking support on Capitol Hill as some of them have come under scrutiny. A key nominee is set to soon face his first public questioning. The Supreme Court agrees to hear TikTok's challenge to a looming January ban. That's as top Senate Republican Mitch McConnell is calling on the High Court to reject the appeal. Jason Blair brings us the update from D.C. Trump and Vice President-elect J.D. Vance speak out against a stopgap measure that would prevent a government shutdown, putting the spending bill in a precarious position. Luis Martinez explains why some Republican lawmakers take issue with the continuing resolution. Russia detains a suspect in the killing of a Russian general in charge of nuclear defense. Arian Pazdar has what Moscow says about the suspect's alleged motives.
This is NTD Evening News. Live from our global headquarters in New York City, here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. The Federal Reserve making its final decision on interest rates this year and offering some insight into where the U.S. economy could be headed in 2025. Here's a look at how it all impacts your finances.
The Federal Reserve making its third interest rate cut of the year and the central bank's final call in 2024.
We're committed to maintaining our economy's strength by supporting maximum employment and returning inflation to our 2% goal.
Consumers looking to the Fed's last meeting of the year to gauge how quickly further relief on interest rates and lower costs for credit card debt, auto loans, and other borrowing might come in 2025. But inflation still isn't quite where the Fed or consumers would like to see it. The November reading of the government's Consumer Price Index showed prices up 2.7% year over year, ticking up slightly from October and further away from the Fed's target rate of 2%. Mark Hamrick of Bankrate says consumers should expect the Fed to take things slow in the year ahead.
The safest bet seems to be that we'll see a slow decline in interest rates in 2025, but not rates that are falling sharply. And so credit card rates, no doubt, will remain elevated. And the people who really win in this game are those that shop around for the highest rate with their savings and those who shop around for the lowest rates for their borrowing.
The Fed's January meeting will take place 1 week after President-elect Trump takes office. The Fed won't factor any of Trump's proposals for trade and tariffs into their economic models until policy is actually set and in motion. And the Dow plunged today after the Fed said it's forecasting just 2 interest rate cuts in 2025, not the previously projected 4. The Dow Jones Industrial Average ended the day down about 1,100 points or 2.6%. That means the blue chip index has fallen for 10 days in a row, the longest losing streak since Gerald Ford was president. That was back in 1974. President-elect Trump's cabinet picks seeking support among senators as they prepare for confirmation hearings. It comes as Trump's former pick for Attorney General is defending himself amid the looming release of a new report. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao has more.
As we're inching toward the 1-month countdown to a new Trump administration, President-elect Trump's cabinet picks are moving full steam ahead to court Senate support. And Kash Patel, Trump's pick for FBI director, and RFK Jr., Trump's pick for health secretary, both back on Capitol Hill on Wednesday, meeting with GOP senators. And Pete Hegseth, Trump's nominee for defense secretary, is facing his first public questioning soon. Senate Armed Services Committee Chairman Roger Wicker told reporters on Wednesday that the committee is holding Hegseth's hearing on January 14th. The former Fox News host and veteran has been rallying support among lawmakers, and the president-elect reaffirmed his support for him despite misconduct allegations. Another figure in the spotlight, former Congressman Matt Gaetz, who already dropped his bid to get confirmed as Trump's initial pick for Attorney General. In a reversal, the GOP-led House Ethics Committee reportedly voted to release this report on Gaetz after this Friday, despite originally voting not to do so in November. Gaetz on Wednesday, decrying the move, says his previous behavior was embarrassing, though not criminal, stressing that he was exonerated in a separate probe and is now a changed man. Republican Congressman James Comer, meanwhile, says the American public ought to know more.
I think that the American people probably want to see this ethics report. I think the Ethics Committee knew that. Now, hopefully, Gaetz will be given plenty of opportunity to defend anything in there that he feels isn't true.
And away from Capitol Hill, the State Department says Secretary of State Antony Blinken on Wednesday met in person with Senator Marco Rubio, Trump's pick to be Blinken's successor. The conversation was, quote, constructive, and the State Department asked that it will support a seamless transition. Reporting by Iris Tao, NTD News.
The Supreme Court today agreed to decide whether a ban on social media app TikTok violates the First Amendment, adding a major case to its docket just before Trump takes office. The ban is set to happen on January 19th unless the app's China-based parent company divests. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell is now calling on the High Court to reject TikTok's appeal. NTD's Jason Blair reports.
Mitch McConnell, the top Republican in the Senate, urges the Supreme Court to deny an appeal by TikTok ahead of the ban that's set to take place next month. McConnell said in a brief to the court that the company's free speech argument is meritless and unsound. He says the right to free speech enshrined in the First Amendment does not apply to a corporate agent of the Chinese Communist Party. Last month, Congress mandated that TikTok's China-based parent company ByteDance divest from the app, or else the app will be taken down from app stores. TikTok estimates that 1 month after the ban, it would lose 1/3 of its 170 million U.S. users. McConnell says the Foreign Adversaries Act was the measured and deliberate result of careful legislation that would satisfy all manner of heightened scrutiny. The senator says TikTok's goal with the appeal is to delay the January 19th ban. He says TikTok hopes to get a different outcome under the Trump administration. Trump has said that he would want to look into a different route with TikTok and its national security risks. He did not go into further detail about how he would accomplish this. McConnell noted Congress set the January 19th date to avoid such political uncertainty. The Supreme Court has arguments scheduled for TikTok's appeal on January 10th. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
Some Republican lawmakers and Trump allies are strongly opposing a stopgap spending bill that congressional leaders plan to push through to avert a government shutdown. The shutdown deadline is this Friday. NTD's Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has more on the story.
Earlier this year, Speaker of the House Mike Johnson promised lawmakers he would not try to fund government through a continuing resolution, nor would he support an omnibus bill. Now, with less than 3 days until government funding expires, Speaker of the House Mike Johnson is asking House Republicans to vote for a second continuing resolution in 3 months, which many are calling an omnibus bill.
You know, they have this, they try to jam us last second because everyone, of course, wants to live for Christmas holidays. You know, they write bills without anyone even knowing what it is. It puts thousands of pages, over 1,000 pages, you know, and please, you know, make sure vote before you know what is in it.
The continuing resolution includes a provision that would mandate the federal government to fully cover the cost of rebuilding the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore, which will total in more than $1.7 billion. The continuing resolution also includes more than $100 billion in disaster relief aid for victims and for areas affected by Hurricane Helene and Milton. And there's also a provision for federal budget to be transferred to the D.C. Council to take over control of the RFK Stadium, paving the way for the Washington Commanders to come back to the District of Columbia. The continuing resolution received criticism both in the House and in the Senate.
This thing, and I've been a no on it a long time. You know my history with fiscal restraint, and we have none in this country. We are in a terrible situation.
I think that what's much more concerning is the fact that the American people are having to deal with an economy that is working really well for the top 1% of Americans and not for everybody else.
Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, the future heads of the Department of Government Efficiency, took to social media to ask lawmakers to reject the continuing resolution. Musk posted that this bill should not pass, and in a different post published a picture of the more than 1,500-page piece of legislation with the caption, "Ever seen a bigger piece of pork?" Vivek Ramaswamy also commented on social media about the bill, saying it's full of excessive spending, special interest giveaways, and pork barrel politics. If Congress wants to get serious about government efficiency, they should vote no. Speaker of the House Mike Johnson will need the help of the majority of House Democrats in order for the continuing resolution to have any chance of passing through the House floor. And it's worth noting that the National Defense Authorization Act, which the Senate sent to the president's desk this Wednesday, also required the majority of House Democrats in order to pass through the House. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
And today, Trump and Vice President-elect J.D. Vance weighed in on the Stopgap bill. In a statement on social media, Trump and Vance were critical of the congressional funding plan and asked Republican lawmakers to reject the proposal, which they say contains too many giveaways for Democrats, including what they called sweetheart provisions for former Congresswoman Liz Cheney. The joint statement said the bill would make it easier to hide the records of the January 6th committee. Trump and Vance asked lawmakers to increase the debt ceiling in a new and more frugal continuing resolution to avert a government shutdown. Police in Madison, Wisconsin are trying to understand the motive of now deceased school shooting suspect Natalie Rupp. Now, officers say she killed 2 and injured 6 at her Christian academy on Monday. A vigil was held in Madison last night for the victims. NTD's Chris Spears has the story and a warning. This report includes content some viewers may find disturbing.
Madison, Wisconsin Police Chief Sean Barnes says finding the motive of the alleged Abundant Life Christian school shooter is his department's top priority. Court documents show suspect Natalie Ruppnow's parents were divorced and shared custody. The 15-year-old lived mainly with her 42-year-old father. Mourners held a vigil for the victims of the shooting last night. Among them was 16-year-old Naomi Allen, a student at Abundant Life Christian School who was on school premises during the shooting.
That's like a very, very high-stress situation. Most of us were crying. We went to the corner. We just hunkered down there. Our teacher, she was talking to us very quietly, of course, like whispering. It felt like we were there like forever. That you never really realize how much something like this will affect you until it happens.
Moving testimony from a teenager witnessing something most never will. Also in attendance at the vigil was Madison educator Laurie Tomasini. She described what brought her to the event.
I'm here because sure. Because this is such a huge loss for our community, and it's just happening too often, and this needs to stop.
An emotional moment for the Madison native, surrounded by her fellow Madisonians, supporting one another in their shared grief. We also recently heard from Wisconsin State Assembly member Jerry L. O'Connor. He says he has multiple connections to Abundant Life Christian School. His nephew and great-niece are students there.
My nephew could hear bodies hitting the floor. My great-niece across the hall could hear gunshots. And as I understand it, there were 9 people in the room, and the shooter shot 8 of them, and the final shot was to her own head. So it's a terribly sad situation. I also have a brother-in-law that's a basketball and golf coach there. And I have a brother whose brother-in-law is the school principal. So I have a lot of connections at the school, and there are a lot of hurting families in that Madison area today.
The Wisconsin legislator helping us understand what some of the 420 students at Abundant Life Christian School experienced Monday. Chris Beers, NTD News.
New York Governor Kathy Hochul said she's ready to do whatever it takes to hold the killer accountable in the United Healthcare CEO murder case. The suspect in that case, Luigi Mangione, is scheduled to appear in a Pennsylvania court tomorrow morning for an extradition hearing. Mangione's attorney said today that the 26-year-old suspect is expected to waive his right to fight extradition and that he could be returned to New York as soon as tomorrow. That's in light of this week's indictment. Mangione was charged with 1 count of first-degree murder and 2 counts of second-degree murder. That includes 1 count of second-degree murder as an act of terrorism. If he doesn't waive his extradition rights as expected, Governor Hochul said she's prepared to request a governor's warrant as soon as possible to ensure he is held and tried in New York. An update on yesterday's killing of a senior Russian general. Moscow now says it has a suspect in custody. The citizen of Uzbekistan has reportedly confessed to the crime. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pazdar has the latest.
A Russian news outlet published this video on Wednesday. It allegedly shows a suspect confessing to the killing of Russian Lieutenant General Igor Kirillov. It's not clear what conditions the unnamed suspect was speaking in. Russian investigators say this about the arrest of the alleged killer.
During interrogation, he explained that he was recruited by the Ukrainian Special Services. On their instructions, he arrived in Moscow and received a homemade explosive device.
This video shows Kirillov and his assistant leave their apartment building on Tuesday morning. That's when a bomb exploded, killing both of them. General Kirillov was the chief of Russia's military nuclear protection forces.
To monitor the general's home, the suspect rented a car-sharing vehicle. The footage from it was broadcast online to the organizers of the terrorist attack in the city of Dnipro.
Russian prosecutors say the suspect was promised $100,000 and permission to move to a European Union country for killing the general. The Kremlin on Wednesday said this proves Ukraine is using terrorist methods to attack Russia.
And this once again justifies our actions during the special military operation.
The Kremlin also says that nuclear weapons treaties with the West could be a thing of the past. That's due to the lack of trust between Moscow and Western allies. But Russia's deputy foreign minister suggests this could change through dialogue once President-elect Trump returns to office.
Such a dialogue took place with the Trump administration during its first term in office. Managing this crisis and reaching a more stable ground should probably be set as a task.
He added that no contacts have taken place between Russia and the incoming Trump team so far. Arian Pazdar, NTD News.
With a ceasefire still holding between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon, Israeli forces are focusing their attention on the Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, the brother of a hostage held by Hamas makes his voice heard at the United Nations. NTD's Jason Perry has the update.
Residents at a tent camp in the Gaza Strip were seen inspecting the damage of an Israeli airstrike on Wednesday, and it appears the location was hit with precise munitions, as the tents around the area of impact had little to no damage.
People were sleeping in their tents here when the explosion happened suddenly. We started running. This is my tent here. I was at the neighbors there. We were still sitting. And suddenly the explosion happened.
And in a different area in the southern Gaza Strip, men were seen chasing after humanitarian aid trucks that were transporting bags of flour. Israeli forces recently reported striking Hamas terrorists who were planning to hijack humanitarian aid trucks and transfer them to other terrorists. Meanwhile, 101 hostages are still believed to be held by Hamas in the Gaza Strip after more than a year in captivity. The brother of one of the hostages criticized the United Nations Security Council on Wednesday.
Your silence is deafening. Your inaction is suffocating. For every day this council fails to act, the message to the world is clear, that some lives are worth saving and others are not. But I refuse to accept that message. I refuse to accept a world where my brother's life can be used as a bargaining chip and be forgotten.
Israel's ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon, said this.
As we speak, negotiations on a hostage deal are ongoing.
We hope we can achieve a deal. You know, after many rejections by Hamas, we hope we're going to have some news before the holiday of Hanukkah and Christmas.
This comes as the Israeli forces say they are keeping pressure on Hamas daily to ensure the return of the hostages. Israel's chief of the General Staff conducted a situational assessment in Rafah in the southern Gaza Strip on Wednesday.
I tell you this, the Israeli communities near the Gaza Strip are coming back to life. Residents are returning. And as they do, our responsibility grows even greater, not less. It is our duty to provide a much stronger security framework so they can feel safe and secure here.
Israel's defense minister, Israel Katz, said that after Hamas is defeated, Israel will have security control over the Gaza Strip with full freedom of action. Jason Perry, NTD News.
Coming up, members of Congress examine how the Chinese Communist Party is weaponizing intellectual property, and a man pleads guilty to opening and operating a Chinese police station in New York City. The U.S. looking to ban Chinese internet routers. That's according to Wall Street Journal sources. Authorities worry the routers are a national security threat. That and more after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Members of Congress are probing China's weaponization of patents and the legal system. Meanwhile, a man in New York City pleaded guilty today to acting as an agent of the Chinese Communist Party and opening an illegal Chinese police station in the U.S. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has the details from Capitol Hill.
Members of Congress examine how the Chinese Communist Party is weaponizing the legal system, intellectual property, and subsidies. On Wednesday, members of the House Judiciary Subcommittee on Courts, Intellectual Property, and the Internet spoke with industry experts who have firsthand experience on this.
China is actively undermining U.S. leadership by devaluing these patents, directly harming American innovators and weakening their ability to compete globally. There are also national security threats in this situation.
And we find Chinese companies selling the module at a profit for as low as $7.50, whereas a Western company can't build it for under $9. Sans profit. Big question on how that happens without subsidies.
China's government has weaponized its legal system with a wide range of patent and competition law tools, price controls on international entities, forced technology transfers, and by providing selective legal protections and incentives seeking to advantage Chinese companies.
One of the things that happens with U.S. corporations that are not subsidized, when your budget goes down and your returns go down, you reduce your staffing at standards organizations. It doesn't occur with Chinese companies. When they're subsidized, they increase the number of individuals.
Meanwhile, a man in New York City pleaded guilty on Wednesday to acting as a foreign agent for the Chinese Communist Party in opening and operating an illegal police station in Manhattan. Chen Jinping admitted to opening the police station, which was an illegal arm of China's Ministry of Public Security. It occupied an entire floor of an office building in Lower Manhattan's Chinatown. It closed in the fall of 2022, and on top of this, Chen admitted to destroying evidence of communications with an official in Fuzhou, China. The FBI has acknowledged that China has opened multiple police stations in the U.S. A 2022 report by Safeguard Defenders found that China uses these overseas police stations to track down, arrest, and extradite people wanted by the CCP, including dissidents of the regime. The executive assistant director, Robert Wells, of the FBI's National Security Branch, said in a statement Wednesday, quote, "Today's acknowledgement of guilt is a stark reminder of the insidious efforts taken by the PRC government to threaten, harass, and intimidate those who speak against their Communist Party. These blatant violations will not be tolerated on U.S. soil. The FBI remains committed to preserving the rights and freedoms of all people in our country and will defend against transnational repression at every front." Chen faces a maximum of up to 5 years in prison, and his co-defendant Lu Jianwang was also charged with the same crimes. He's pleaded not guilty and is still awaiting trial. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Jack Bradley, NTD News.
The Wall Street Journal reports that federal authorities are considering a ban on some Chinese internet routers. These routers provide internet to huge chunks of America. Here's the story.
The Wall Street Journal reports that U.S. authorities are considering a ban on routers from a Chinese manufacturer. According to the journal's unnamed sources, the Departments of Commerce, Defense, and Justice are currently investigating China's TP-Link technology company. NTD cannot independently verify the report. TP-Link routers connect Americans to the internet, and authorities have reportedly expressed concerns over a potential national security risk.
It could be really dangerous. Everything you do on your computer, everything your family does, all the games you play online, all those things that you're doing in your house that is transmitting through the internet could be essentially stolen.
Tech expert Brian Horning says he doesn't know whether the routers are actually a threat, but says it's possible they could be. TP-Link has over 60% of the U.S. router market for homes and small businesses. Even the Defense Department uses them, popular partially because of low prices.
There's vulnerabilities in the firmware of TP-Link routers that could and have given hackers access to the device that it's very hard to detect.
Tony Sabai is a cybersecurity expert at Checkpoint Software Technologies, which has researched TP-Link routers. It's concluded that hackers could have access to them in a way that's very hard to detect. TP-Link says it's fully in line with industry security standards and says it's willing to work with the U.S. government to address security risks. Reuters reports that the Commerce, Justice, and Defense Departments and TP-Link did not immediately respond to requests for comment.
Coming up, the Supreme Court agrees to hear the high-profile TikTok case, deciding the app's future in the U.S. A legal counsel and attorney on national security law weighs in on the case after the break. Welcome back. If you're just joining us now, here are some of today's top headlines. The Federal Reserve cut its key interest rate for the third time this year by 0.25 percentage point. U.S. stocks tumbled to one of their worst days of the year after the Fed hinted that there will be fewer rate cuts next year. Luigi Mangione, the suspect in the killing of the United Healthcare CEO, is expected to waive extradition to New York during a court appearance in Pennsylvania. That's according to his attorney. He could be transported to New York as soon as tomorrow. The House Ethics Committee voted to release its report on former Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz involving allegations of sexual misconduct. Gaetz responded, saying he is innocent and fully exonerated by the Justice Department. The Supreme Court agreed to take up TikTok's challenge to delay a law that could potentially ban the app on January 19th. The High Court agreed to expedite the case and hear arguments on January 10th before President-elect Trump takes office. Joining us now to discuss TikTok's case is Gerard Filitti. He's a senior counsel at the Lawfare Project and an attorney specializing in national security law and counterterrorism. Gerard, thank you so much for joining us. Great to see you again. Now, to begin, the Supreme Court will hear arguments on January 10th. That's just 9 days before the ban was set to take effect, unless TikTok divests from its Chinese parent by ByteDance. Now, first, what do you make of the Supreme Court agreeing to hear this case?
It's not surprising that the Supreme Court is taking on this case because the way this case is framed really puts forward two contradictory at times positions. One is that this is a national security issue and the government does have a legitimate interest to regulate, to pass laws preventing Chinese ownership, communist Chinese ownership of this platform in the United States. But at the same time, there are First Amendment implications because this is a communications platform at the end of the day, and people are raising the argument that this is potentially restricting speech. Now, how the Supreme Court rules on this will have a great impact on what the government can do in future cases where we have foreign ownership that is perhaps threatening to U.S. national security interests of entities within the United States.
On that last part, with just a few days before that ban is set to take effect, walk us through the possibilities of what might happen to TikTok, given that Scotus is taking up this case.
Well, if 5 of the 9 justices agree that it is likely after these arguments that TikTok, that ByteDance might prevail, might win, then they could place an injunction preventing the law from taking effect on January 19th, meaning that when Donald Trump comes into office, he has more flexibility on what to do. And of course, we would all be awaiting the full Supreme Court decision, which probably would not be out until this summer. If the Supreme Court does not issue an injunction immediately stopping this law from taking effect, that indicates that more likely than not, it will side with the government and conclude that this law is valid, is constitutional in order to protect national security. And again, when it finally issues a full opinion in the summer, we will expect the court to say just that.
Now, free speech advocates praise the High Court for taking up the case. In your view, how much merit does this First Amendment argument have?
It's not without merit, but when you have 2 competing and equally valid concerns, one being national security and the other being First Amendment, more often than not in the past, courts have given deference to the government's interpretation, to the government's intent behind a law. And when they see the validity of national security concerns, then it's likely to be upheld. Now, it may be the case that the government needs to provide more information, more proof of the harm or the potential harm to the U.S. by ByteDance continuing to operate as a Chinese-owned company before the Supreme Court is satisfied. But generally speaking, national security has been seen as a legitimate government interest that outweighs certain aspects of the First Amendment.
On that national security site, you and I have spoken before about how China has its own version called Douyin. TikTok doesn't exist in China. Now, the Chinese version has a different algorithm, time caps, and a different user base. Why would China push for an app to be in other countries when it doesn't allow it within its own borders?
Well, that's a very good question. And part of that has to do with that algorithm, has to do with the data that's potentially captured, or in some cases we know is being captured by TikTok and other similar platforms. They have an interest in obtaining the data. At the end of the day, they don't care. TikTok doesn't care what you post. They want your data. They want to know where you're located. They want to know what you're looking at. They want to know what trends you are following and what you are communicating with, what else is going on your phone. Because when you agree to the terms of conditions, when you install that software, you're essentially giving TikTok access to a lot of information that's held on your phone. So this is why you have a different version. You don't need that in China. You already have the government knowing everything about you. What they want is to learn more about foreigners, what practices are in the West. That's why this software is potentially so dangerous.
And President-elect Trump has signaled a reversal on TikTok, at least when it comes to banning the app. He said that banning it would only bolster Meta and seems to credit TikTok with helping to secure more of that youth vote this past election. He also met the TikTok CEO at Mar-a-Lago the other day. What do you make of Trump's stance here and what that signals for TikTok?
It's also worth adding that when we saw the national debates this past summer during the election, we saw TikTok ran a lot of advertising on more Republican-oriented channels. It seems that they are trying to ingratiate themselves with the incoming Trump administration in order to have that benefit. At the end of the day, what Donald Trump ultimately does is a mystery. He has been on both sides of this issue. I think he fully understands the national security implications. And while he seems to be leaning towards the side of free speech here, he has also said recently that he, of all people, could help get a deal in place to arrange for a buyer of TikTok in the U.S. in order to comply with the law. And he does have people who have approached him for this purpose. So we don't really know at the end of the day where Donald Trump stands on this, other than he is trying to work within the system, and he might actually facilitate a sale before this law takes into effect.
And without court action, the law banning TikTok is set to take effect January 19th, or a day before Trump enters office. That's because the Chinese parent company ByteDance has signaled it's not willing to part with its algorithm. Now, it would be up to the Justice Department to enforce that ban. Given that, how likely are we to see the Trump presidency enforce that ban, given his recent statements here?
Well, potentially the Trump administration, the Justice Department would enforce it. What a ban looks like is after January 19th, Apple, the Apple Store, Google Play, they would be prevented. They would be forbidden by law from continuing to update and do business with TikTok, meaning the software would remain. You would still have it on your phone, but the functionality would decrease over time because it would not be allowed to be upgraded. The DOJ would enforce this law by going after anyone who allowed updates to go through their platform. So essentially, Apple and Google are the big entities that would be affected by DOJ enforcement. Would the DOJ go after them? Potentially, because they have other considerations as well when it comes to the types of content that Apple and Google have put out there. So I don't think that we will avoid seeing enforcement. I think it is really too early to tell, and Donald Trump really needs to make up his mind, if you will, where he stands on this.
Gerard Filitti, thank you so much for joining us.
A pleasure. Thank you.
As the head of the antitrust division of the DOJ steps down on Friday, how will the incoming Trump administration continue with the government's antitrust lawsuits against major tech companies? Hear from the former Assistant Attorney General at the Wisconsin Justice Department and former chair of the Multi-State Antitrust Task Force. Tune into NTD's Capitol Report with Steve Lance at 7:00 p.m. Eastern Time. Coming up in baseball, the Yankees make another big move in the wake of losing out on Juan Soto. NTD's Dave Martin joins us to explain after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, a lot going on today, but let's start in Major League Baseball. As on Tuesday, the league released a year-long study on why there's such an increase in pitching injuries. What were some of the takeaways?
The big one was that the report showed there was a consensus anyway that pitchers aiming for their maximum velocity and stuff, that means ball movement and ball spin, is what's really driving the increase in arm injuries. I think people actually kind of thought that. But anyway, when they throw hard though, it increases the torque and the stress on the elbow, and it's injuries to the ligament in the elbow, that's the UCL, that are on the rise as pitch velocity is on the rise as well. Now actually since 2008, the average fastball has gone from 91 miles an hour to 94 miles an hour. Really the average speed of a slider, a curveball, changeup, they're all up like 2 to 4 miles per hour as well. Now this report, it was really based on interviews with a number of people in the game, like coaches, trainers, front office executive, even some surgeons. Basically, they recommend rules to decrease the value of those short duration max effort pitching, like relievers who come in just for an inning and just go all out. Still, it sounds like they have a lot more research to do in this area because, of course, the faster you pitch and the more movement on the ball, the better you're going to be. So pitchers aren't going to want to give that up.
Well, staying in baseball, the New York Yankees traded former MVP Cody Bellinger last night. Now, how does his versatility fit in New York's lineup?
Yeah, it looks like a really good fit. Bellinger can play either center field or first base, and he plays both of them very well. As a hitter, I mean, he's good, albeit inconsistent. Anyway, if they put him in center, that allows Aaron Judge to shift back to right field, which is where he was until they got Juan Soto. So it's a better fit for him. They also have an opening at first base, though, right now, depending on whether they re-sign Anthony Rizzo. The trade itself, interesting, really looked more like a salary dump by the Cubs. Bellinger's contract calls for more than $50 million over the next 2 years. Meanwhile, the Yankees gave the Cubs 30-year-old pitcher Andy Petit, who made less than $1 million last year. But for the Yankees now, they've acquired 3 very good players since missing out on Juan Soto. That's starter Max Fried, closer Devin Williams, and now Bellinger. They might not be done yet. I mean, there's plenty more time for trades, and I will definitely be here to update you when those happen.
All right, well, shifting gears to the NFL, the Atlanta Falcons announced they're benching quarterback Kirk Cousins in favor of rookie Michael Penix. What's the significance of this?
Money, for one thing. They just signed Kirk Cousins to a 4-year deal worth nearly $200 million just earlier this year. Now he's already being benched. Of course, they hedged that bet by also taking Michael Penix with their first-round pick, hoping one of them would be the answer at quarterback. But Cousins has really kind of struggled lately. He leads the league in interceptions now. He only has 1 touchdown pass in his last 5 games. 4 of those games have been losses. So Atlanta has relied heavily on the running game for offense. Now the Falcons are still mathematically in the playoff race here too. They're 9th in the NFC, but only the top 7 make the playoffs. 3 games to go. So I think it's quite a statement to make this move kind of right now. Put a rookie in at quarterback during a playoff race. It's a really bold move here by Atlanta.
Well, tonight in the NBA, the league is back to a near full schedule. That's after Milwaukee won the NBA Cup last night.
Yeah, incredible. Milwaukee started the season just 2-8. Now they won 12 of 15 games since then. They've kind of flown under the radar a bit recently. The last 2 years they've lost in the first round, mainly though because of injuries to Giannis Antetokounmpo and then Damian Lillard last year. But they are a contender if those two are healthy, and right now they're showing it. I mean, Giannis leads the league in scoring anyway at more than 32 points a game. But anyway, they're off tonight, but an interesting game tonight, though, should be New York at Minnesota. Now, these two teams had a really big trade in the offseason. Basically, it was Karl Anthony Towns for Julius Randle, Dante DiVincenzo, and some draft picks. Really, it was actually a 3-team deal involving a whole bunch of draft pick possibilities. It would take like 10 minutes to explain, and you'd probably be asleep at the end. But that's the gist of the trade. But this is the first time now these two teams have met. I was really surprised by how much the Knicks gave up in this trade. I was really surprised they got rid of DiVincenzo anyway. It's hard, though, to see if either team actually looks marginally better. I mean, they both are in early playoff position. So I think if we check back in come March or April, we'll see, who did better in this deal.
All right, well, Dave, as always, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you.
On a cold winter's day, Vancouver's Gingerbread Street becomes the sweetest scene, attracting many tourists. It's a festive event dedicated to spreading joy and granting wishes. Visitors can enjoy these exquisite gingerbread creations while also bringing hope and joy to children in need. Here's the story.
From cable cars to tree houses, from cuckoo clocks to a nutcracker stage, gingerbread houses are full of creativity, forming a magical and dreamy gingerbread street. Every corner is full of surprises, attracting crowds of visitors to take photos.
Well, it's fantastic. See how people are so creative. They use their talent in order to put this display that is fabulous. I'm just delighted. I'm thrilled.
This is the 32nd annual Creative Gingerbread House Design Competition, organized by Hyatt Regency Vancouver, Canada. Gingerbread, as we know it today, descends from medieval Europe. The act of shaping the bread began with German monks in the 13th century. It later evolved into figurines in the 15th century, before becoming an acknowledged profession in the 17th century, when only professional gingerbread bakers were permitted to bake it outside of Christmas and Easter.
My daughter here, she's been enjoying everything from Cookie Monster to there was nice BTS concert going over there, so it's been wonderful.
Their creativity and what they're able to create, it was pretty blown away.
Each piece not only showcases the creativity of the designers, but also incorporates their fond memories, making every detail heartfelt and special.
It was Alice in Wonderland inspired, so there's lots of little clues in my house, curiosity and wonder, just kind of the festive spirit, I guess.
Anything that we can do to bring a little bit of joy and hopefully give that chance for those kids to have that joy.
A meaningful community event, the people who created this dreamy gingerbread street are also raising money for the Make-A-Wish Foundation of BC and Yukon to help grant wishes to seriously ill children.
Well, she really wanted to meet Elsa, so we got to go to Disney World, but without Make-A-Wish, nothing like that would be possible. We got to heal and really connect as a family and really make a memory together.
Christmas is just so much more than just presents under the tree, and it's being able to have impact in our communities and make a difference. And we have over 500 kids waiting for their wishes to be granted, and they really give kids the opportunity to have hope and strength in very, very dark times.
Merry Christmas!
NTD News, Canada.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.